Perfect time to call on our next guest, Miranda. And joining us now, Craig Shirley, president of Shirley and Banister Public Affairs. Craig is the author of the book, Reagan's Revolution, the untold story of the campaign that started it all. Craig is Skyping in from another famous location for another president, Mount Vernon, Virginia. Craig, it's good to have you. Welcome back to America's Forum.
You bet. Thank you.
Now, let's just ask you, what should the administration have done about this past weekend in Paris? Should the president have gone? Should the vice president? Give us your thought on that.
I think it probably sounds like I'm piling on, but it was a grievous mistake on the part of the Obama administration for a number of reasons. As we all know, and it's not just the modern era, this goes back to George Washington's time, is that all presidents have understood that Shakespeare was right. The play's the thing. All the world is a stage, and that stagecraft is statecraft. Is that how you appear is almost sometimes as important as what you say. He cut himself off and America off from a grievous war against terrorism that took place in France last week. But he also cut himself off from his liberal base in America, which is why you see so many liberals attacking him, because so many liberals in America take their inspiration from the French Revolution instead of the American Revolution, which conservatives find their inspiration.
You know, Charlie, first we heard Josh Earnest citing security concerns as a valid reason for not showing up, and then later we heard him say that the president wasn't well informed about this trip. What's your response to all of that?
Well, you know, the old adage in politics is that, and I hate to use cliches, but you know, when you're in a hole you stop digging, is that this reminds me of so many other cases where presidents and the staff couldn't come up for adequate answers when they made big mistakes, and so they just kept adding, you know, one canard after another, and it just becomes you know, a growing out of control mess. And that's what he really has right now. He's getting behind the story, and he needs to fix things, or to at least make things right with the French and with the world community, and send the right message to Al-Qaeda. He's got to figure out a way to get ahead of the story and send a message not only of unity with Europe, but also a strong American position against Islamic terrorism.
Craig, 2 minutes remain in this segment, and compounding the difficulty is the fact that last week the president, I believe, showed good instincts. He stopped by the French embassy, signed the condolence book. The announcement was made that Eric Holder was going to be there in Paris. The Attorney General was there, but he did not go, obviously, to the big march.
No.
What on earth were they thinking?
They just the lights are out over at the White House right now. And what's worse is that the photo that I saw was of Holder standing behind a gate, 16-foot, you know, wrought iron gate, which was probably the worst image you could send out from this administration in this time against the war on terror.
So is there any way that the Obama administration can recover from this? What would you suggest?
Minute remains, Craig.
Miranda, is that they can recover, and they will recover. Is that he's going to have to do some kind of mea culpa, you know, either a statement or a speech, or a surprise visit to Paris, and visit the ruins of where the magazine was bombed. There's got to be something that they will eventually figure out how to do to, as I said before, get ahead of the story, and that's what they need to do. Otherwise they're just going to keep wallowing in their defensiveness.
Well, while the current administration is behind the 8 ball, so to speak, in terms of international perception of just where the president stands, the talk continues about the next campaign for the presidency. After the break, Craig Shirley very graciously agreeing to stay with us. He's going to discuss presidential prospects and a curious fight that could take place in the GOP. Jeb Bush versus Mitt Romney. All that and more ahead on America's Forum. Let's continue our conversation now with Craig Shirley, the president of Shirley and Banister Public Affairs and a longtime observer of Washington conservative politics. So, Craig, I don't know if we characterize this as Reagan's 11th commandment being disallowed. Nevertheless, Senator Cruz had some interesting assessments there of Mitt Romney in the 2012 campaign. Do you agree with those assessments?
Well, I do agree with the assessment, and to Reagan's, which is I spent most of my time, as writing. I just finished my fourth book on Ronald Reagan and worked on his campaigns and for many years. Is the 11th commandment that when Reagan was referring to it, which came out of the '66 gubernatorial campaign in California, was about personal attacks. It wasn't about saying you disagree with another Republican about policy or politics or issues or things like that, but not to engage in personal attacks. So it is perfectly fine, in fact, encouraged that inside the Republican Party there's a vigorous debate over the future of the party and what it stands for. So Senator Cruz was entirely in bounds, and I think his comments were a fair assessment of the problems of Romney in the past and a possible Romney campaign in the future.
Greg, let's talk about Jeb Bush and Mitt Romney. You said, quote, Bush and Romney presently occupy the same time-space continuum of moderate establishmentarians. What do you mean by that?
Well, the Republican Party has always housed, it's always been, Miranda, it's kind of been schizophrenic. It's housed two personalities, and it goes back to the time of Eisenhower and Taft and carried forward to Goldwater and Rockefeller, Reagan and Ford, Reagan and Bush. Now, by the end of the second Reagan administration, the party was pretty much unified in its approach to governance and American society and economics and philosophy. Reagan had literally remade the Republican Party into a populist ideology based on the individual and based on localism or local control, and not the federal government dictating to the states. Is with Bush 2 beginning starting in 2001, is that Karl Rove and George Bush redefined the Republican Party that Reagan had created, which was they moved it from organized around freedom to organized around security. What has happened is that with the outgrowth, as we all know, of the Tea Party, is that you have a Republican Party that is now back to where it was, which is the Tea Party Reagan-esque populist freedom-based wing, and then the establishment, security, corporate, big government republicanism wing. That is where Jeb Bush and Mitt Romney occupy. That's their universe, which is the big government side. The Rand Pauls, the Ted Cruzes, and others, the J.D. Hayworths, were on the Reagan side. So it's engaged in this titanic struggle, and we see it playing out, with legislation, and we see it playing out with campaigns and primaries, and the party committees versus the Tea Party. We see it playing out in many arenas, this ongoing struggle over what the Republican Party is.
And mindful of that, Craig, with about 45 seconds left. Jeb Bush, Mitt Romney occupy the same territory. Do they go after each other, and suddenly now a conservative gets into the driver's seat in terms of actually capturing the nomination as Ronald Reagan did in 1980? 20 seconds to respond, sir.
I think that's entirely possible. As we all know, as you know better than anybody from electoral politics, is that when you have the two top heavyweights banging on each other, which I think is inevitable between Romney and Bush, it opens the door for a third candidate, and I think that's entirely possible for the 2016 Republican nomination.
Craig Shirley, the name of his book, Reagan's Revolution, the untold story of the campaign that started it all. He knows whereof he speaks, applying the history to the current Republican Party. And there's more ahead here on America's Forum.